So to create an API with Next.js is quite simple. All we do is go into our pages folder, and within API, we have a folder called auth. We just want to create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this movies. And within movies, I just want to create a new file called index.ts, like so. So if I go on to /movies, then I will have a file on there. So if I go into localhost 3000 /API/movies, we will have access to an API here. At the minute, we don't have one, so we will create one. So if we go into our next documentation on API routes, we can first of all see we have pages/API/user.js. So in our case, it will be pages/API/movies. So I'm just going to copy this handler function here and paste this in over here. And instead of the name being John Doe, I'm going to have an array of objects which I have already defined. So if I just copy this across, we have a long list of 19 objects in here. So we want to return this, and each one is separated by a type, which is original, or it could be new, or whatever it may be. And that is what is going to be filtered into each of these rows. If I save in my file and then refresh the /API/movies, we now have the API data here. So it's as simple as creating that. I now have two errors here, which are TypeScript errors. So if I control space, nothing happens. So on a handler function, we get a request and a response. So for the request, we can import it from next API request and next API response. So I'm just going to paste this in. And as you can imagine, the request is going to have a type of next API request, and the response is going to have a type of next API response, like so. And now if I save, I now have the get all movies route defined. So now what we want to do is create a individual movies route. So if I go into here and go into dynamic API routes, as you can see, we have a /pages/API/post, and then we have a wildcard id.js. So we want to create our own wildcard on there. So in movies, we're going to create a new file and going to have array brackets of id, close the brackets, .ts, like so. So essentially what we want to do now is when we go to / the id of 4, we want to return the id of this one here, which is tangled. So if I press enter, at the minute, again, we have the same error, which is resolver is not a function. So in our id.ts, I want to define our list. So I've already got this here as a constant. So essentially, if we get the array of the objects that we have, so const movie list, scroll to the top, is here, and I also want to give this a type. So if I go into and close this component and into my types and create a new file, and I'm going to name this movie list.ts, like so, and this movie list is going to contain the same as this object over here. So in my movie list, rename this to ts.ts, and we want to export the interface of movie list type. So movie list type, which is an object, and this object will contain the following data. So first off, we want to remove the extra closing and opening brackets, and this type will be string. And essentially most of them will be a string. So if we paste in another string here, this one is a string also, so is this one. As you can see, they all are strings apart from this one, which is a number. And now if I save, we have a movie list type that we are exporting. And now if I go back into my API and paste in, import this from the types. Again, this is an array of objects. So if we add the array brackets here, so we have defined the movie list. Now if we go into our file here, essentially we want to create a handler. So if I copy movie list, scroll to the bottom, paste in the movie list here, and if I just copy this syntax across into my ID file, so essentially what we want to get is the slug, or in our case it's going to be the ID. So instead of that, it'll be ID, so request.query.id. And if I go into my index again, we want to copy the request and response. So I'll copy this across from there, and then we can just control spacebar to import from next, like so. Now we have access to the ID, which is in the params, which is /4. We essentially want to filter out the relevant ID from the movie filter that we have declared above. So const filtered movie is equal to movie list, that's there, dot filter. Each movie we want to return the movie dot ID that is equal to the ID that we get from the request.query.id like so. And if I just delete this res.end here, what we also want to do is get the first index of this. So if we add the array brackets at the end and 0, and then as you do with Node.js, because this is essentially Node.js, we want to send the data as a 200 response. So res.send the 200 response JSON. So we want to convert to JSON the filtered movie like so. So now if I save and refresh the page, we get 200. We should change this to status instead. Save and refresh. We aren't getting anything back. So that is because ID would be a string within the URL, whereas movie.id is a number. So essentially what we need to do is this condition will always return false since the types number and string have no overlap. So we need to convert the movie ID to a string. So easiest way to do that is to wrap it around a string like so. And now if I save and refresh the page, we now have access to the individual movie and the individual movie data like so. So if I change this to 7, we should get a different response, which we do. And we get the title of my music story like so. So that is the APIs complete. What we now need to do is render out the films onto the home page.